Thank you so much. Firstly, to Nicole for the invite today. To say it's an honor to be here is, small fry at this stage. And how I step on to the stage here following the acts that preceded me, I think I'll have to follow my own advice that I give students is try not to compare and despair, but to aspire and inspire. So really it is a true privilege to be here today. I've travelled from Dublin just yesterday, so you may bear with me if my voice is a little dry or something today. It's been a long trip. So I met Nicole in Dublin actually, so she may be familiar with some slides I'm going to show. And thank you very much for the introduction. So the heart of my work really, the heart of my teaching practice, my research work, my advocacy work in now inclusive education. And I suppose when I received the invite to speak here today, I just absolutely love this concept of neurodiversity. I mentioned it to my colleagues and they said, yep, we love the Americans. That's all positive. We'll take that. So this image here really is my work as a social scientist, is my background really, is that sort of engaged, empathetic listening to the research participants, in the main who have been students with diverse challenges through primary school, we call it secondary school, but you guys say high school, through to higher education and really finding spaces within the mainstream for different students by being driven by listening to their needs, their challenges, and championing their strengths throughout. Thanks so much. I'll take that now. I had a smile earlier when Charles mentioned his enjoyment of cartoons. I too am a big fan of Charlie Brown. And I suppose it didn't surprise me that he himself, the creators, were neurodiverse thinkers. So this image here of Charlie's sister Sally and Linus really is something that drives my work, in a sense that no student would feel this sense of, hey, what's going on there? And the wah, wah, wah coming from the stage. Hopefully you're not getting any of that today from me. But so there will be that engaged practice. And in particular, today we're thinking about neurodiverse learners and people with challenges in the classroom and being in a minority in a mainstream classroom, that the teaching methodologies, the structure is really catered to all. And so that's something that I have had the privilege of trying my best to ensure within our own systems on a national basis. So I've worked with AHEAD. I think you guys in America have a similar organization that supports higher education access. I've worked also with the Center for Inclusive Technology. There we had a testing system to user test and evaluate assistive technologies and explore mainstream technologies that would support learners in the lifespan, really. And so this is an NGO, and we worked with a range of diverse learners. They came in to our centre, we worked with the technology they brought, introduced others. And as I'll tell you a little bit later, we certainly experienced challenges in terms of resources to ensure that students could come into us, and how would we sustain our own centre. I've had the opportunity to work with another NGO, the leader of providing services for students with dyslexia, the Dyslexia Association of Ireland. And right now I'm working at Trinity College. I've also worked with Mental Health Reform, the umbrella organisation for mental health services. So that is a big component of my work as well, the interest in self-esteem for students and the battering that confidence and self-esteem can take for students with diverse needs in a mainstream classroom. So if you haven't been to Trinity, or you have been to Dublin even, you may have heard or been to this library, the old library. It's also famous for featuring in a Star Wars movie. So while this is kind of nearly what we have a promotional tool for the university and even Irish tourism in general, we looked at how our diverse student population, in particular students with neurodiverse thinking, viewed the library. And let's just say it was less enchanting an idea to stroll through the dusty books. It does house, however, the oldest book in the world, dating from the 9th century. And I suppose I was really intrigued by Marianne's comment there about, historically, how we viewed reading. This book was originally written in Latin, but had a huge emphasis on the visual in terms of telling the narrative of the 4 Gospels. And today it's visited by over 500,000, and yet some of our own students have yet to be in to view it. So we wanted to do something about that. So we've been organising trips in to the Book of Kells and our own library, which seems slightly ludicrous because it's on the doorstep, but that sense of being overwhelmed by this type of environment. I suppose to mention the kind of academic and to set the academic scene as well, like from the educational psychological background, we do know that listening to students and their views and experiences really has an amazing impact in terms of actioning what their future can be like, as has been said, and listening to student voice about the factors that they think impact on their educational achievement and well-being. We can gain insights on how to improve educational experiences for children and young people with dyslexia, voices that have often been silenced. We've learned that students with dyslexia are now, we know, and if we didn't know by now from listening to the speakers, have a preferred learning style. And I suppose that's just pause for me, is that listening to people's preferences, number one, how do people like to learn? How can we embed that within mainstream? And what are the benefits for the whole class is so important. And also, as I mentioned there, my interest between the link between student self-esteem and academic achievement, that they are part and parcel. If a student isn't feeling comfortable, confident within the setting, their academic achievement is going to be severely impacted. And also, leading from that, our knowledge that having student involvement has a transformative effect to boost the self-esteem in young learners, especially those neurodiverse learners. And so just to say that that really drives my passion for emphasizing student strengths. And there are vastly more renowned speakers in the area of neuroscience speaking ahead of me. So just to reiterate some of the strengths that others have mentioned, and mostly for me what stands out is the capacity to bring ideas together, to develop confidence in speaking through ideas and mind mapping out plans of ideas, as opposed to maybe traditional methods, certainly within the Irish context. So just to say that while we know all of this, we know this to be true now, we know, we've heard and we have listened in our research to what students have to say, nevertheless, we do still find ourselves, this quote I have here is from a very recent study. I supervised a training teacher who was interested in the area of dyslexia and well-being. And despite the fact that within the school there is a policy of diversity and inclusion, the practice is quite different. And so we carried out a qualitative piece of research with students and teachers students in this large urban boys' school that had a noticeably higher proportion of students with dyslexia. And we wanted to hear what their thoughts were on the way in which teaching took place in their mainstream classroom. And so, despite our knowledge that students prefer visual spatial learning techniques, kinesthetic learning, and despite our knowledge that if that isn't met, their self-esteem is eroded, this is still happening. So within this study, we heard reports from students that said things like, it's a bit hard, like in different classes, saying classics for me anyway. Like I have a lot of brainy, smart people in the class. They know a lot more words than me. And so like today and all, I didn't have a clue what half the words they were saying were for like describing people. Like I wouldn't know what they meant. Says one particular student. This is a reflective quote because I'm just pulling out a couple of very strong themes. And this really is in reference to comparing themselves to non-dyslexic peers within their class group, and really the erosion of their own self-esteem and confidence as a result of this. And then, I suppose, from the teacher perspective, what do they feel? Are they aware that this is happening in their classroom, that some students are just shutting out, and the negative labeling self-concepts that are being developed, which are so disempowering? So as one teacher mentions, maybe he's read something wrong. You know, young lads are young lads. They'll automatically label it. Oh, you're stupid or something. You know that if that kind of confidence is knocked, and either if I don't nip it in the bud, if I don't address it in a constructive way, that damages, that will damage things for them massively. So just giving you a quick vignette of the kind of qualitative data that we had. And you can see here from this quote and listening to that the teacher really is struggling with this, you know, trying to get a balance. She's aware it's happening, but at the same time, she's not sure of the means to intervene. And I suppose this also echoes what we heard from Marianne and I know Nicole's work on just that real need for teacher training in this space. So the teachers also can feel confident in how to address these issues. We also heard that like the class will laugh at you and stuff. So this is really demoralizing. So a student then putting themselves forward to read out in class. What we also found as well was that many of the students, neurodiverse thinkers, felt that they weren't called upon as often, you know? That they actually were feeling maybe confident in the content, but not so confident in the way in which they were asked. So this really goes back to that assessment piece. And so therefore, the teacher then lacked and lost confidence in calling upon them. Everyone reads and writes at a different pace, but the teacher just goes at one pace. So we're really then kind of trying to drill in. And again, given my time, I'm not going to spend much more on this, but just to say that the students then were coming up with some ideas for their teachers. So could they slow down? Would there be different paces with which she could deliver the content, different formats? And as another student mentioned, teachers should approach different learning methods as well, because say if you're just taking notes off the board, how is that going to help some people compared to people who might learn or visually or talking about it? So again, it just really goes back to that idea that these students are comparing themselves with the incomparable. They are trying to compete, which is not on a level playing field, that has not been set up to best support their needs. And so, how can we empower these students? We can tell stories of positive examples of neurodiverse thinkers. And I suppose when we were reading through the data, a quote sprung to mind. I mentioned earlier about comparing and despairing, but this, don't compare yourself with anyone in this world. If you do so, you're insulting yourself and your own talents and qualities. And as he's been mentioned previously, thanks to Lawrence, but Einstein's well-known quote, everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. And that really resonated in the data that we had with these young people. And again, as others had mentioned, that this doesn't stop at high school. We are finding out similar reports and similar narratives within our higher education system. And that is if they make it there, you know? That is if they are there. We are finding an underrepresentation across a range of courses for neurodiverse learners, and it's something that at the university we're looking into. So from a national perspective, we were looking, okay, so we do know of very well-known, highly successful neurodiverse thinkers and celebrated individuals with tremendous talents and strengths in spite of what society perceives as challenges. And so, given my work at the Centre for Inclusive Technology, I had the opportunity to develop a project on a European scale with European partners and build a consortium to look at this concept of peer support and developing champions within the community. So while we can aspire to the likes of these wonderful, celebrated neurodiverse thinkers from previous times, and the own sponsor here today, Charles, who's amazing, we were thinking, hang on a second here, we know about people in our own community who are doing amazing things, and how do we advocate for them, promote them, and find ways in which and sometimes on some levels, the peer support piece can be a voluntary arm of someone's activities. How can we have this acknowledged, recognized, and in some way accredited so that these individuals can get recognized when they go to apply for jobs and move into career pursuits? So we really felt that looking for what we were referring to as digital inclusion champions in our community, people who had mastered the ability to navigate their own assistive technologies, mainstream technologies, because we had met them at our centre. How could we promote their work, connect them with others who may be struggling at school, like we have heard from the excerpts of this recent data? How could we empower these individuals to connect with others, connect with educators, to make some difference in this space, and promote positive well-being and self-esteem? So this was a European project funded by the Leonardo da Vinci, actually a funding scheme, the Lifelong Learning Funding Scheme. We are a European consortium. And in the development of what we ultimately achieved was an online peer support platform for people, for educators, employers, and at the heart of it, students with difficulties or challenges who had mastered their digital skills and who were then in positions where they could support other people with their skills to ensure smoother pathways to mainstream education, higher education, and employment. And so we had over 600 people engaged with the process. There were a range of requirement gathering activities ranging from individual interviews, focus groups, surveys, European-wide. And I won't spend a huge amount of time on that, just to say that was the types of activities that led to the development of our website. And a platform and a space for people to share their experiences. What we developed ultimately was this platform which had 4 main functions. It was really a space where people could come in, connect, hear about the stories of our digital inclusion champions, reach out, ask for peer support in terms of something small that they might be having some difficulty with assistive technology equipment. There may be a particular area of education that they were struggling with. There could be long-term pieces of peer support or quite short pieces. It was also a space where we could share the stories, the success stories of our digital inclusion champions who had succeeded, were working in the tech industry or working in education, and so ultimately have some go towards I suppose, giving a new narrative for some of these young people's lives who had always felt that their difficulties were a disadvantage, when in fact we were saying, look at these amazing achievements of some of these people who live very close to you. You know, it's not too far. You can. So what was fantastic about this was, this is just a picture here, a few pictures here. We collaborated with the MEP, Marion Harkin, who was working in the space of digital inclusion, to push the EU agenda and strategy for digital inclusion, to think about neurodiverse learners, to think about students with disabilities within this agenda. And also, it led to some of our digital inclusion champions setting up their own workshops, both at their own campus, on campuses across Ireland, across Europe, and also within their workplaces, as spaces where they could, number one, demonstrate how our website worked, get people to sign up, recruit, all that kind of work for us, and also have a capacity to raise their own profile and talk about their own journeys and share information about job seeking and just sort of tips around how they were using their technology in their workplace. So that's just a snapshot of some of that activity. Now, this is something quite different. Again, if you have been to Ireland or if you've heard about this, anybody know what this might be? Yeah? Kissing the Blarney Stone, exactly. I wouldn't mind giving it a kiss right now, actually. So, you may have heard, anybody know what results or why anybody would want to kiss this stone? Anybody have heard of this? So it's meant to be, as we refer to it, as the gift of the gab. The gift of the gab really refers to the gift of eloquence, the gift of speaking. And so I show you this picture because this would demonstrate the lens that people would go for the strengths of what we would perceive as neurodiverse thinking. You know, they're outstretched here against a cold brick wall, against a 500-year-old castle. There are queues around the block, and the result is the wish to have the strength of what some neurodiverse thinkers feel they have innately. Well, that's certainly what one of our digital inclusion champions said to us. One of our champions, a real success story, he's gone on to set up his own startup. He mentioned here to us, I'm struggling to read my own text there, actually. So, a neurodiverse thinker himself, somebody we connected with through the Dyslexia Association of Ireland, somebody who had been volunteering at their iPad technology workshops. They'd been working with children, and he had been recruited with them and then came on to work with us. And so he said, winning the confidence of people. What works best for me is talking to people. Sure, I have the gift of the gab thanks to my dyslexia. No need to kiss the Blarney Stone. I can show them how the technology works, chat about where it can help them in college with their assignments and work, connect them in with other networks, all about showing by example and not by explaining by writing. Through this community, I got a chance to demonstrate how both I had mastered AT that helps me overcome challenges of dyslexia, so I can focus on what I'm good at, showing others and connect with potential future clients. It's all led to me gathering a team around me with a mix of skills to develop my own startup. So he actually was crediting the mix of abilities that were available to him within our online platform. So, for instance, he was meeting with students on the autism spectrum who he connected with and were doing development work with, and he was basically tapping into the strengths of some of the other students with challenges and built a team out of this. So that's just, I'm aware of my time now as well, So where to next? For the strengths of our neurodiverse, our fabulous, talented neurodiverse thinkers. So I'm kind of going to push things just a tiny bit at the end here, because I'm going to show you just a headline piece. It was just back there in the end of January. So another part of my work is I'm a teacher, a lecturer at our Centre for Intellectual Disabilities. It's the first of its kind, both in Ireland and internationally, whereby students, neurodiverse, cognitively challenged students, are having the opportunity to learn in a higher education institution and mix and mingle amongst all other students. And the learning that we are developing here is incredible. Our first graduates just went through just there in January. And one of the novel approaches we think that we're adopting at the centre is a brand new model of entrepreneurship. And we're working with businesses, and we're working with local community and enterprises to enable our students to have work opportunities right through their training. And right now they're developing their marketing strategies, they're meeting with businesses, they're trialing interview skills, and all of these opportunities are not available in a higher education setting elsewhere. So we're pleased about this, but we also would like to think that one day it would not actually make headline news. So here's to the future. And lastly, I mentioned earlier that I work with the organisation AHEAD, and on a national level, and I really agree with our previous speakers that this is a really collective issue. It's a social justice issue, and we do need to work collaboratively. And so the organisation AHEAD in Ireland has teamed with our Teaching and Learning Forum, and for the first time ever, we're involved in this Universal Design for Learning digital badge programme that awards campuses who are doing a good job, who are championing our neurodiverse thinkers and other students with challenges within their campus, embedding strengths-based practices within the curriculum, within the modules, and ensuring really real-world career opportunities are embedded within the programs from the get-go. So we're really delighted to be working on this. So yeah, I mentioned I'm a Charlie Brown fan, and I think really, the persistence and the grit and determination is really inspiring for me, for the students I work with, but in all levels. And the notion of never giving up, is really at the heart of the work. And I would extend that to all people here. It's the students. We certainly feel like we're saying to the students that they should never give up, but really it's passing the gauntlet back to the educators, back to the activists, back to the professionals here today, that we don't give up on this talent. So yeah, as I said again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.